All right, today's video covers our notes on the Great Depression. As always, when we do the videos, make sure that you are listening to what I'm saying, but also, and more importantly, that you pause it to make sure that you are getting all of the notes you actually need. If you go through the video and you have any questions, please send me a message. Okay, so between World War I and the Great Depression, there's the 1920s. We call them even the Roaring 20s, right? They are awesome, and they were exciting, and they were fabulous, and everybody is having such a good time. And unfortunately, because that prosperity, because that wealth is uneven, right? Uneven prosperity, there's going to be some issues that are going to come into play once the stock market actually does crash. There's also an issue because the Western democracies, notably what is created in Germany post the Kaiser of World War I and Italy, are going to make it very, very difficult to challenge what's going to be a threat of totalitarianism. That word total, right? It means absolute. It's just basically a brand new word for absolute power, right? Total power, absolutism, complete control. This is where you're going to have the dictators that we're working on those presentations. So, the 1920s are known as the Roaring 20s. A lot of people have a lot of money, more money than they've ever had in their entire lives. And this is where, if you've seen the Great Gatsby movie with Leonardo DiCaprio that these scenes are from, you see the just gross displays of opulence and spending money like it's always coming. This is not the same everywhere. There are poor people in the United States and in other countries, and it's not happening in Germany. If you remember, during the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had to pay reparations. They had to pay war damages. They had to pay tons of money to mostly Britain and France. It actually is so bad that they don't even get all of their reparations technically paid off until like just a couple of years ago. And so their entire system is never the roaring system that you see in Great Britain and you see in France and you see in certainly the United States. In Germany, you have the Weimar Republic, and look, that word republic we've talked about before. You talked about it when you talked about Rome. We've talked about it when you talked about the United States. It means that you have a representative democracy. However, it's really not that good. They have massive inflation. We talked about how that's when your money isn't worth as much as it used to. Their national debt is skyrocketing. And this is, I think, one of the best illustrations of what's happening. See in this picture, all of this is money. And she is sticking it in her stove to burn because the paper that the money was printed on, the actual money itself, was worth less than buying the coal or the wood it would take to heat her wood stove to cook her food. You see pictures of kids playing with stacks of money instead of blocks, and it's just people. They talk about people taking wheelbarrows full of dollar bills, German dollar bills, in order to just buy a loaf of bread. I mean, it is horrible in Germany from the very beginning. We have some issues in the United States. I'm not going to sugarcoat that for you. We have a lot of poor people, and we have a lot of wealthy people. A lot of the people working in, say, the textile mills and the steel mills and the shoe factories and all that, the wages they were being paid, remember we talked about the Industrial Revolution, even with the labor unions, the wages they were being paid weren't high enough for them to buy the actual goods they were producing. That's actually one of the things that Henry Ford, when he creates the Ford cars, the Model Ts is so famous for, is that he wanted to build a car that his employees could actually buy, because it wasn't happening in a lot of industries. They also started laying off people fairly early in order to reduce production and keep their prices low. And we had an agricultural surplus, which means we had more food than we were consuming. So then we had our farmers losing their jobs because they couldn't pay their loans and they couldn't pay their bills because they couldn't get their crops sold, and then their farms were repossessed and they're going homeless. It's a rough situation. Every nation essentially in Western Europe put on these things called tariffs. And those are taxes on imports. We've talked about the difference between imports and exports. Imports come into your country, right? Because it's the eyes. They are basically, the concept is that, like, say as the United States, we're going to put high taxes on goods made in France. Because as they come into our country, we want to bring the price of the French goods higher in order to encourage Americans to buy American-made products. Which sounds great, except that then no one's trading internationally, so it's making the economies stagnate. It's making the economies stand still. We were producing the most goods, and we're dominating the world economy, but it's mostly because France and Great Britain, remember them? They were destroyed in World War I. They've had massive problems in World War I. Their factories get blown up and that sort of thing. So they didn't have the factory system in place. Our factories don't get attacked. So we could shift over immediately from a war economy to a peacetime economy and keep going, while they had to actually build. Sorry, if you don't know, I had to pause it for a second because I was coughing. So the stock market is, if you ask anyone, like, why did the Great Depression happen? Oh, the stock market crashed. Well, yes, but we need to know why. There's a lot of reasons, like, for one, that the stock market, if you can check on this chart right here, was going up and up and up and up. I mean, look at those jumps. Those are huge leaps. But the issue is that people started buying stocks on credit. We've talked about credit before, where, like, you don't actually have the money to pay for it now, so it's sort of like a mini loan. Except that the way they're buying stocks is, like, if I bought stocks when they cost $15 a share, say, I would sell them at $20 a share, and the $5 I made in this scenario on each share I would use to pay my loan back. Except that way, way, way up here at the top, they didn't have the money to cover it, and we had a panic, and it just plummets. It absolutely plummets. The stock prices hit the floor in October of 1929. We call it Black Tuesday. And there are all kinds of stories about stockbrokers that at the end of the day just committed suicide, and people who were going home to literally absolutely nothing, having to call every client you have and telling them that you've lost every dollar they've ever made. It's really, really sad. So one of the problems is that the way that a bank works is I'll put my $5,000 in the bank, and then the next customer wants to take a loan, so the bank takes my money and loans it out. So when I come to collect my money, it's not there. And the banks did not have enough money in order to fulfill all of their people coming, and they had what are called runs on the bank, which basically meant that everybody that was capable of going to the bank was trying to take out all of their money, withdraw their entire accounts, and the banks couldn't do it. And basically what happened is that once they gave out all their money, they shut the doors, and you may have gotten all of your money, but the person behind you may have gotten nothing. Every dime they'd ever made and invested was completely gone. They had nothing. Absolutely broke. We've put systems into place in order to counteract that, which you probably remember learning about in middle school. You certainly will learn about it some next year. Our credit system collapses. World trade, like this is a world trade map, and I'm going to take it and make it a little bit bigger for a second. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars here, and you go from $36 billion in 1929 to, what is that, 28? That's huge drops. It's billions of dollars, and there's no way to combat that anybody could see. Another thing that we have is that the unemployment rate globally is skyrocketing. right? If I make this one bigger and I bring it to the front, you have fairly decent numbers here. 5%, 9 or 8 or 9%, even 11%. That's not terrible. And in 1932, just 4 years later, you're looking at, what is this red one? Germany, that's 30%. In America, it was 1 in 4, because we're right at 25. 1 in 4 Americans did not have a job. That's tragic amounts. It's absolutely awful. So, unemployment massively high, especially in the industry, especially in the factories that we talked about before when we talked about the Industrial Revolution. These are factories. We've talked about 1 1/4 are unemployed. And if you look, this picture that I'm currently writing on is a really good example of how it rises and falls and rises and falls, and it gets a little bit better there in between 37 and 38, and then it gets better between 32 and 37, then it gets worse, and then it falls again until it goes back to roughly a couple of percent in 1942 when we're having, World War II. You're also going to have extremist governments, especially in Italy and Germany. There's also going to be extremist governments in the USSR and in Japan. These extremist governments arise that are led by Mussolini and Hitler in Italy and Germany because they promise to solve the financial crisis. They promise that their actions will help to boost the economy and bring back the glories of the old days, and in order to make sure that you're not starving. And when people are looking at their children literally starving to death and you promise them to help stop that, you're going to vote for them regardless of what else they have to say. All right, so that's the end of your Great Depression notes. As always, please, please, please ask any questions that you can, and make sure that you go back and get anything that you missed. We will go over the questions on your notes at a later date.